Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're going to be doing a painting based on BioShock. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. I played BioShock back when I was in college, and the opening is really strong. It's really stuck with me all these years, and I thought that that lighthouse in the beginning would be really cool to paint. So instead of doing it like at daytime or something, I thought it would be really cool to depict it during a storm. So I decided to sketch it out and kind of bring some of these big waves kind of crashing up into the side of it with some storm clouds and lightning bolts in the sky. So this is going to be a dark painting, and I want to start by gessoing this canvas black. So the first thing I'm going to do is gesso the canvas with black gesso using a foam brush. Sometimes I find that one coat of gesso isn't enough when I'm doing the black on top of the white. So I'm just going to give it a second coat because I'm seeing some of the white gesso show through in this area. Two coats of gesso did really good on this. I don't see any of the canvas showing through, so I'm ready to start painting. If I go to my sketch, the first thing I want to start doing is blocking this in with chalk pastel and then blocking it in with some basic colors, just so I know where things are going. So I'm going to be using a white chalk, and I'm going to roughly figure out where I want the lightning bolt to go and where I want the lighthouse to go, where my horizon line is going to sit, even though it's going to be too dark to see it, and then where some of these waves are going to come in, just so I can start to build those basic colors. I finished drawing, so it's time to add color. I want these clouds to be lighter on top of a darker sky, so it's going to stay very dark along the horizon. That way these clouds are going to show up and the tops of all of these waves. So for the sky, I want it to be a bit more blue, blue-gray, and the water I want to make a little bit more violet. So I'm kind of sticking in that range of darkish blues and violets for all of these colors. With these colors blocked in, it's time to start refining it. I kind of want to brighten everything in the sky. I really love this cloud, but I think it's just too dark. And I need to kind of make this cloud over here look more like this one, where it fades from the light into the dark instead of light, and then there's a rough transition into the dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my lighter colors here, and then start to fade them into some darker colors as they get down here, until it's all the way faded into black using the same foliage brush. The clouds are looking really good since I touched them up, especially the transition from this one into the darkness. Now I want to do the same thing for the waves. I'm starting with my lightest color, which is kind of a light violet bluish color because I want the water to be a little bit more violet, just like in game. And I'm starting on the edges of all my waves. I want to make sure the lines of all of these are right, and then I'm going to fade it into a darker color. I'm really happy with how these waves turned out. Now they do need a little bit of highlight with some of the mist and foam at the very tops of each crest, but I want to finish the lighthouse before I do that because I kind of need to use this area here to kind of cover up the base and make it look like it's actually sitting in the water. So I'm going to leave all of that alone for now and work on the lighthouse. And the first thing I want to do is get it drawn in here perfectly, the right size, the right shape, all of the lines where I want them to be, and then I can start painting that. I've drawn everything in, and at first I wanted the door to be in the center of the lighthouse, but it didn't give a good sense of depth. Like, it just didn't feel as big as it should be. So I moved it over here so you can kind of see more of the stairs and everything else with that little balcony, and that really helped it, and I really like where it is now. And because of where the light source is coming from the lightning bolt, it's going to be, you know, so bright casting light here on the ocean. I want this side of the lighthouse to be lighter, the middle part to be a little bit darker, and then the left side to be very dark. Now I know the lighthouse is casting light from up here, but it's not really casting it down onto the sides of the lighthouse, it's casting it out. So I'm going to leave that alone for now and just kind of work on all of the grays that kind of sit here and here on the lighthouse. I'm going piece by piece and kind of working my way down the lighthouse. Now for this layer, what I did is I started by doing the value, picking my flat grays to make it lighter on this side and darker on this side, and then with these recessed pieces, making them shaded appropriately for where the light's going to be. So like on the left side of this one, it's going to be lighter because it's going to catch the edge of that light as it hits the corner here of the lighthouse. And then this side will be in the shadow because it's kind of tucked up underneath. So I did all that shading, and then I had to do the texture and detail. That layer in particular didn't really have any texture, it just has these details of these kind of stepped pieces going back into the lighthouse. So I just used a transparent black to kind of do those lines to make it have those stepped pieces as it goes back further. Now this layer has some texture. So I did the flat colors first, and then I did some transparent black and kind of just scrubbed it in to make it look like it has some texture so it's not just a flat gray. Now I skipped the edges because that's going to kind of get a frame just like these ones do here, and then that part is kind of on top of the flat part that I've already done, so I'll kind of give a little bit of shadow on each of these corners, and then I can do those ones detail. I finished up the big chunk of the lighthouse here, and I just did the brick, and then I did all of these pieces that kind of sit forward. Now I had done white on the right one, and I think they're too bright, so I'm going to use some light grays to go over the top just to darken them a little bit. And then the last thing I have to do for this chunk is make these rectangles look round. They kind of recess into the buildings on each side, and then kind of towards the very middle of each rectangle, they kind of bubble outwards and kind of stick out from the building. So I'm going to erase all of my chalk so I can see how this looks, and then I'll work on those rectangles and darkening the white. I'm working on this door layer here, and this part feels a little bit green, so I've just taken some phthalo green and added it to the gray that I was going to use, just to tint it a little bit. I've finished the left part of the lighthouse and the middle part. So on the right side, I just have the door and the balcony stair part right here. Now, I don't think that the left two pieces are dark enough for how dark I want this to be, so I'm going to let them dry and work on this part right here. And then once that part's done, I'm going to take some shading gray and do 2 coats on the left and then 1 coat on the middle. So everything on the middle is just going to get a little bit darker, and then everything on the left is going to get a lot darker. So they'll really make sure there's a high contrast on this entire piece. So I worked on the door before, and I realized that I forgot to do some of the gold, so I drew in where the gold is going to go, and I'm going to use some cad yellow, and I'm going to use some yellow ochre to kind of bring those gold details in for the door, and then I can start on the balcony and this little rock down here. The door is done in all of that yellow ochre, and then I wanted to make it brighter and have some highlights on it where it's catching the lights from everything here on this little porch. So I used more cadmium yellow and a little bit of white just to bring some of the tiniest little highlights on this to give it some depth. It's just not a flat yellow color. I also put the lights on the sides of the doors, and I've started to sketch in the ones that sit here on this little porch. Some are up here, but I don't want to kind of clutter that up. I'm not sure if I want to add the ones up here yet. Now I still have to do the statue and the light on top, but this part is mainly done. I'm just going to add that shading gray to darken up the left side, and then just a little bit to darken up the middle. The reason I wanted to darken the left two sides of the lighthouse was because the lightning bolt, once it's there, is going to cast a very, very harsh, bright light on this side of the lighthouse. Because of that, everything else is going to be pretty dark. I want this to have these bright whites and these dark darks in here because of the lightning bolt casting that light. Everything else is going to be pretty dark. The only light it's getting is bouncing off the waves and then reflecting back up towards the side of the lighthouse, which is why I didn't make it solid black. It's just dark. And the shading gray works really good for applications like this. It doesn't work good on every color, and you want to test it first before you actually try it on your canvas, because you'll just have to repaint on top of it if you don't like how it looks. That said, when I put it on top of the little bit of gold down here, like on this railing, and then the bars that sit on the outside of this, it kind of just muddied that gold color up. It didn't really make it look darker, it just kind of muddied it. But that's okay because there's going to be more wave that sits down here. But on top of the gray, when I'm using a carbon black, it just works good. It's just like a dark black that's transparent on top of everything else. It's as if I added more black to the color originally, but instead I'm kind of doing it on top, like this smoked piece of glass on top of those parts. So like I said, it worked really good for this application, but it doesn't always work good, so test it first. With the lights done, the porch is done. Now there is some lights that sit here, one works and one doesn't in the game, and I'm not sure if I want to add them in because I feel like it would bring the focus down into that area, and I don't want that. I want the focus to be on the porch and some of the other things. So for now I'm going to leave it alone and work on the figure on top of the lighthouse. Now, in addition to my reference images, I do have a little drawing mannequin, so I can pose him in the same pose of the figure on top and work on drawing that here exactly how I want it and making sure it's proportional. So I've drawn in the last two things, the lightning bolt and the top of the lighthouse. Now the top of the lighthouse is going to be very, very light gray, the statue up there, because it gives off light, so it should be bright, just like the right side of the lighthouse, not like the left side. And then for the lightning bolt, I'm going to be doing like a bright titanium white down the main bolt, and everything else is going to be more of a transparent white, just so it's not as intense as that main bolt of electricity. I'm using Golden's Fluid in Zinc White because it's a little bit transparent. I can kind of start and fill this in as I want, and it'll leave things slightly transparent so they're not as bright. And then once I'm done, I can go back over it with a liquid titanium white to brighten up any areas that I want to. The last bit of detail I have is for the orb up here on top of the lighthouse. I made it light gray first because it kind of has this inner part to it, so I'm going to leave that dry and then I'll work more on it. I'm also going to lighten up the clouds in here just because that lightning bolt is going to make them a bit brighter. And then I'm going to move on to the foam. I'm going to use some kind of grayish blues like I have here, but lighter, and kind of do the foam and like the spray on top of all of these waves. Once that's dry, I'm going to add more white into it to make it brighter, and then kind of underneath the lightning bolt and then over on this side, I'm going to add more of that lighter color just to give it some highlights where there's highlights here in the ocean. Now for the disc on top, I did gray with it, but it kind of has this tealish cast in-game. So I added a little bit of teal to my gray and then just kind of went over the top of it to make it have that cast. So I filled it in, there's kind of these two rings, and then the middle one is more of a sphere if you view it from the side. So I kind of tried to do that with that moon crescent shape to kind of give it that roundness. I also used some glazing liquid to kind of paint that color a bit bigger than the actual piece, just so it has this little bit of a glow. So that part is done, and the very last thing I have to do is highlight the waves just a little bit more. Now I'm going to remix up the color I was using a little bit earlier and just add a little bit more white to it so I can kind of do that on just some of these highlight parts. And then once I've done the whole kind of ocean with that, I'm going to use some zinc white, which is a transparent white, just to lighten up some areas, like around where these lights are and then kind of where the lightning bolt is, because that's where the most light is going to be hitting the water. And we're done! We have the Lighthouse from BioShock. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a poster or a phone case, or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.